when I kicked off track 4, we were going to look into our crystal ball. So let's dust that off, and we're going to pass it over here to our panel to my right, who is going to talk about the future of the online learning environment. Take it away, guys.
Hello, and welcome to our panel. So if you've been in previous sessions with David, you may have noticed that we're using one of the new Google Slides features. And David's going to show you that right now.
So because we want this to be a little bit more interactive, hopefully, so help us out. If you have a device, or if you're next to someone that has a device, you can go to ask a question at that address and type in a question, and it will show up like this. So it's going to look, you'll be able to ask it anonymously if you want to, or you can identify yourself if you'd like to, and you can upvote people's questions. So there's an example of a question, and you can see what other people are asking as well. So at the end of our presentation, we'd like to kind of open it up to the floor and have more of a discussion, and hopefully this will facilitate that. And that's it.
All right. So one of the key dynamic tensions in education, from K through 12 all through higher ed, is the back and forth between what should be kept within school and what should happen out of school. In school is a safe space where students can learn, and that entails moments of succeeding and moments of failing. And they can do that without significant consequence, and that's important because it's not great, but it's okay if you fail a test on waterborne pathogens. It's much worse if you fail to detect waterborne pathogens when testing your local water supply, right? And so we need this separation. But at the same time, those out-of-school experiences give us field trips, they give us service learning, they give us internships, they give us practica, they give us all of these high-impact teaching and learning experiences. And there's real demonstrated value in facilitating interactions between students and professionals and community members, and we know this. Meanwhile, U.S. law, our old friend, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of, say it with me now, 1974, FERPA, enshrines the principle that what happens with students' educational records, that students have the expectation that what they do in school stays in school and stays private, stays out of public. And that's easier to do when you've got physical walls. It's easier to do when you've got a building. It's harder to do when you're online, when people do school at home, when they do school at a coffee shop, when they do school at the library, when they do school out in the middle of a field, right? You need some sort of virtual space in which learning can be focused. And so the first LMS, we're getting into some history here. The first LMS, anyone want to take a guess at what year it came online? I'm using online here with scare quotes. 1985. We're 10 years before the creation of the World Wide Web. We're talking about essentially an educational bulletin board system using modems. Go back and watch the original War Games if you don't remember that or weren't alive for that. And they happened in Norway. The first LMS is called EKKO, E-K-K-O, and it connected different locations to a centralized computer that was serving up educational material. But in the US, we're mostly familiar with the big LMSs like Blackboard, which we use here currently at UNE. Blackboard launched not in 1985, but rather in 1997. And Blackboard promised a secure online space where all of the things that at the time they thought were what education was could happen. So instructors could post course materials, they could post lectures, students could watch and listen to the lectures, students could submit assignments or take tests, and faculty could comment on those assignments and give feedback on the tests. There's even a more or less functional gradebook. If you used Blackboard back then, you know that it wasn't great. But this was all in an online environment that was FERPA compliant. So Blackboard took the classical idea of Plato's Academy, which started in a grove of olive trees outside of Athens. called the Hecademia. And it was sacred to the goddess of wisdom, to Athena. So, perfect spot. So they took this garden of learning and they put a big old wall around it. And that's where we are right now, right? Most of our online learning takes place in an LMS. It's convenient and it's compliant. And like any other piece of technology, it shoehorns us into a particular set of assumptions and practices around what online education is, what it looks like, and what it does. So we're here today to question that paradigm. In the same way that autonomous cars promise to change the look, the purpose, and the experience of being in a car. Because when you're in a self-driving car, you do not need a steering wheel, you do not need instruments. What are you doing in the car? Maybe you're reading a book. Maybe you're playing video games. Maybe you're bird watching. Who knows? But you're not doing the things that we do in a car right now. So in the same way that changes the paradigm of what a car is, what it does, what your experience is, we're asking what education might look like and what it might do if we leave behind the limitations of the LMS paradigm. So I'll be discussing the ways we might harness big data to change the relationship between students and their education. David Bass-Clark will be discussing how learning theory points us in new, interesting directions. And Aaron Connor will wrap up our discussion with an examination of the wall around the garden and how we might bring the outside in. So let's talk about big data. Right now, the most important repository of student information at UNE is our Student Information System, Banner. And what's in that system that's related to students? We've got transactional data. We've got their name, their identity number, there's probably the social as well hidden somewhere in there, address, what program they're enrolled in, what courses they've taken, what grades they've taken, have they made their tuition payments, all of this stuff. Is any of this not already known by the student? Hopefully not. Does any of this help the student to become a better learner? Not really, right? What could they do with this? Not a whole lot. But we want to learn about ourselves. Big data companies like Facebook and Google also want to learn all about us. We want to better understand ourselves and find out which Avengers character we are. I'm Dr. Strange, by the way. Facebook and Google want to make money from our data. But one of the promises of online education is a system where we can better understand what's happening in teaching and learning with every student in every course, because everything that happens in that course happens in an online space. It's mediated by technology. And because of that, it's all capturable and analyzable. So how do we avoid being creepy with all of this? How do we make ethical, empowering use of that data? One of the ways that we might do that is by putting that data in the hands of the student. Just like any profile on any social media site, why couldn't we create a student educational profile? And what might that look like? So what if a student educational profile included things, not just the courses taken, the way Banner does right now, but what competencies the student achieved, and to what degree they achieved them? What about performance differences across various learning activities? So how well do you do? Have you done historically on discussions, in group work, in in-person work, on presentations, on tests, on essays? Preferences for feedback. Do you prefer getting written feedback, getting video feedback, getting audio feedback, getting inline commenting, getting endnotes, having one-on-one conversations around your work with your faculty member? What about your career or life goals? What about making all of this student-controlled and fed with data from the educational experiences that they're going through as they're doing it? And we could even curate this. The students could themselves curate learning experiences, artifacts, you name it. We're talking about potentially an e-portfolio system on steroids. and one that is shareable, right? Because we can share aspects of our profiles in different social media platforms as it is. And why would we want to do that? We could empower students to better understand their own education. At that point, all of the stuff that we may be seeing about a student, they're seeing as well, and are able to think and reflect on it in a way that is handy and convenient. We can empower educators to better understand and reach their students. We can allow faculty to tailor their courses to their current students. Imagine if you're a faculty member and you look at, hey, I'm teaching this course coming up, and I pull up a dashboard and I see which competencies that are in my course my students have already been exposed to and how well they've done, or which ones they have never seen before. And we could also use this to inform student advising, both academic advising and professional advising, being able to see what a student's done, what they enjoy doing, what competencies they've achieved, and what their goals are would help us to better help them to choose their own path. It's an interesting question. We don't have it yet, and right now, what we would be able to collect with this would only be what our students do with us. But increasingly, as more and more education happens in online spaces, even in face-to-face education, if you've got a kid in K through 12 school, how much of the work that they're doing is captured and represented and shown to you as parents through the school LMS? What if we could bring that data together and make it something that's useful, not just for us, because we want to help students succeed, but we want to help them to be better learners and to better understand themselves. So just one piece of something that we could do differently that would change the entire relationship that we would have with students, that students would have with their education, that students would have with their own history and their own ability to present themselves, which I think would be pretty cool. So I'll turn it over to David now.
Okay, I'm David, and I'm not very good at coloring within the lines, so you're about to find out. So I was supposed to talk about learning theory and where that might point us in terms of social learning, and I have lots of words on these pages, so hopefully I can follow myself and you'll be able to follow me. But a lot of what we're talking about today, I think, is this balance between innovation, which is on the name of this building, and tradition. And I think that even today, we might even disagree on some of the things we say, or we might say things that are shocking, and that's kind of the point. And that's to get maybe you as well involved. So hopefully later you can ask questions and answer each other's questions as well. But briefly, I want to talk about learning theory. I'm not going to go into the names or the history, but rather just what it is. So the social learning theory, that exact phrase is based on the basic idea that people learn by observing other people and then by modeling that behavior. And then there's also this other theory called social constructivism, and that's an emphasis on the collaborative nature of learning and the importance of the cultural and social context that learning is done within. So with that as a construct, I kind of went from there and thought about where we are today in our LMS, which I think is discussion boards. That's essentially where we are today. And that is, by definition, this social constructivist theory of learning. People creating meaning by bouncing ideas off of one another. And we do use that quite extensively. The phrase classroom discussion might conjure up some fear or different emotions within different people as you think back, or even now, to classrooms you might have been in physical spaces when you were discussing. Maybe you were the shy, reserved student. Maybe you were the person who monopolized the conversation. But whoever you were, the mere act of holding a discussion online does change the nature of that. So it provides a little bit more of a space for a student to reflect and to think and to have time. And the asynchronous nature of our courses also change the nature of a discussion. So a discussion in a virtual space is not the same. But what has this really accomplished? So instructional designers, curriculum designers, students, faculty, and entire learning ecosystems are trying to figure out, they're bubbling with ideas for how to go further than that. And so here's just a few that I feel like are on the precipice. Precipice, that's the right word, right? So social streams, when we look at Facebook, which was mentioned, and we think about a feed and what that is, how can we apply that idea? So how can we display news, announcement, and updates from learners? There are pieces of this in LMSs today, but not a great model for this. How do we make their learning visible? And as Richard pointed out, how do we make it visible on their terms, not just visible, how do we have that shareability so that they can share their key achievements and build their learning from one another beyond the discussion board, beyond that module, but maybe between courses, across curriculum, across programs, across the world. How can we build that in? Another point I wanted to make was, think about it, if Batman knows that Robin has picked up an award for completing Vigilantism 101, he's going to be keen to dive into that subject. So I think that's kind of the way we need to start thinking about this. Also, team-based learning and leaderboards, so encouraging teamwork. You can have anonymous teams, so if people don't want to be identified, you can put out a pseudonym, or you can put out a team-based structure that helps, that collaboration drives completion and builds upon something. Leaderboard systems, social Q&A areas, user-generated content. So how can we have users actually generate content that is maybe as good or better in some cases than an instructor might be able to generate? And how can we use that content to help future learners? How can we build upon that content to create a library of content to help everyone? Gamification is a little bit off the rails here, but it is really related to when we think about badges and leaderboards, how do we engage learners? I think gamification and social learning go hand in hand to ensure that learners are motivated when we're thinking about how they're motivated. So it creates a sense of competition, and that is a core tenet of gamification. Learner-generated content, but what about going further with that? Ratings and comments and Reddit-style upvoting, which we're going to see in a minute. So how can we crowdsource what's important to the crowd or not important? How do we judge that? And then I want to look briefly into tomorrow here. I think I have like 1 minute. So what if we tore down that garden wall instead of poking holes in it or changing it? What if we just tore it completely down? It makes me think of strong AI and where we're going with a sage on the stage idea versus a guide on the side. So what if we completely redefine teacher and learner and we don't have these roles, and instead we have a system, a computer system, an AI system that's helping do things that humans are really bad at? So for example, an artificial intelligence system I was reading in China, actually, this August, thousands of Chinese middle school students participated in a 2-day AI teacher versus human teacher. That's probably terrifying to a lot of people in this room. And believe it or not, this is a math, middle school students in math. The AI teacher outperformed the human teacher by 5.4 points. So it was a pretty substantial difference in that set of research. It's only one set of research, but there are certain things that humans do really well, and there are certain things we don't do well. So what if we embraced the things we don't do well, dealing with enormous amounts of data, finding patterns in those data, and then being able to send that back out into the universe and make meaning from it and make connections with people. So I don't think it has to dehumanize it at all. I think it can actually focus us on the human aspects of education. So that's it. Now Erin's turn.
So I'm going to bring us back to the image that Richard started with of the notion of the walled garden and how the LMS has sort of become this sort of postmodern feature of the walled garden. And when we talk about learning management systems, and many of us who work in this field often express frustration, and it's something we complain about, I think it's really important that we figure out how to make that case for people who aren't involved in this every day. So I'm going to ask us to think a little bit about why we're frustrated by this. So first of all, I think saying that, we shouldn't be mad at the LMS. It's doing what we built it for, right? I mean, it functions as a gatekeeper. And if you think about how it sort of grew up sort of in this notion of the walled garden, the idea that a classroom space is a place that you enter with permission. There has to be a way for the academy to sort of control who gets to go into that room and who doesn't. And if you think about many of us in the days where we had to have someone initial that little note card in order to like get into class, that's the space that the LMS has walked into for us to try and gatekeep that. And in that space, things like credits are currency. It becomes what the student enters for. And again, the LMS functions as the person guarding that doorway. Are you allowed to be in here? Did you earn credit? How could I tell that you did? So when we get righteous about, oh, the LMS is confounding us, we kind of built it this way, right? This is kind of our fault. So thinking about how it is a natural extension of the walled garden, and it's not surprising that we created this digital version of the very thing that education has always been. And I think it's important also to recognize that in that process, we hang pieces on this, like our notion of FERPA and protecting what's private. And in addition to our students' data, we also use the LMS to protect the intellectual property of the university or of the academic. So there are lots of other reasons sort of underneath that surface of, the M in LMS is there for a reason. It's a management tool. So when we talk about throwing the doors open, what would that actually mean in terms of the organization that we work in? So the next time you're complaining about Blackboard, I think it's important for us all to remember why it looks like what it looks like. So, and I think a lot of this probably made sense, I think, to many of us when we started out thinking about online education, right? I mean, we needed a place to make sure, who was registered for the class, and a place to put grades, and a place to return work, and all those things that at the time seemed crazy. I mean, how does that happen? But now we do it in Facebook. Right? Now it's become this very banal kind of thing of the idea of sharing an image or sharing a document, I can do from my phone. But at the time, it felt like we needed these places. And in that time period, thinking about what else has changed. So right now, our industry faces these challenges to the relevancy of education. Why does it matter? Why do we get a degree? Why is it valuable? In the face of mounting student debt, we're being challenged to make the case for why what we do, why is it valuable? And at the same time, we have a group of learners who have grown up in an environment where the idea of the transfer of knowledge, which is sort of that underpinning of education, right? It's, the teacher teaches you the thing, and you now have the thing. But now, that transfer of knowledge happens by going to Google. So that nature that's eroded as well. So here we sort of sit inside the walled garden, right, with the outside of the garden is saying, why is what you do valuable? And the students we brought into the garden saying, I can Google that. And that leaves us in this sort of prison we kind of built for ourselves. So now I have a story. I always have a story. So there was a colleague that I was working with, not at this institution, who had sort of won the academic lottery, and he'd gotten an NSF grant. And his grant was to involve his students in research looking at this obscure little invasive beetle, little shiny green thing that he was going to work with his students on identifying where it was occurring. And in project planning this, we'd come up with this idea of looking for, I think it worked that he needed people who were going to be outside at the same time, in the same place every day. And we sort of came upon the idea that, kids who are outside at recess do that. And so he wanted to be able to work with kids to use these things, right? Theirs or their friends or their teachers, to capture the images of these little invasive beetles. Great, and we were super excited about this, as you can imagine. It was a way of creating citizen scientists, and it was a way of engaging elementary school teachers in science, and we were just over the moon at this thing we had discovered we were going to do. And the whole thing came to a crashing halt when we had to try and bring the JPEGs and the metadata of the shiny little invasive beetle into the LMS that he was using and that was specified in this grant that he had won. And it was confounding that we had had found all these science teachers all over the country, and all their kids were all excited about doing this, and we couldn't get pictures into our LMS and we'd all sit there being like, I can put this picture anywhere, get it to Facebook and put it on Instagram. Why is this a big deal? But we created those structures, right? Like, we built that thing. So, we found a workaround, we created a website, it was fine. But that experience for me has always sort of stayed. First, the irony of, like, the invasive beetle isn't able to actually get into the LMS. But also the idea that we almost missed this opportunity that was so powerful. So when you think about what we do, us here in CGPS, and the idea of how tied graduate level learning is to demonstrations of specialization, right? Like being able to talk about a clinical work or a practical work or the environmental interaction. We need to get to sort of where the Beatles are, right? We need to be able to get our students out there. We also need to be able to bring those specialists in. And we have the great fortune of having instructors who in most cases are sort of practically oriented. They are working in the field. But I know, I've had this experience, and I've heard my colleagues say this too, of we have a faculty member who says, hey, I know somebody who's a specialist in this, this precise thing. Can we just enroll them in the class so they can, no, we can't. Blackboard needs them to be an administrator, a student, or an instructor, and there isn't that sort of in-between in the way we have this installed. So again, it's that, it's a great idea, it fits with our mission, can't make it get over the wall. So some of the ways in which this has worked and is working and can work for us, as we talk about things like e-portfolios, that is a way, a sort of tunnel under the wall, right? I mean, it gives us the opportunity for students to create work and then share work outside of the college to get feedback and to use to promote themselves. So if we think about things that are practical and can happen tomorrow, sort of turning that e-portfolio into one of our ways of interfacing with the outside world, I think is really something powerful and unraveling a little bit to sort of show how important it is that our students are checking their specialization, checking their knowledge with the real experts. And then the other sort of more out there is to invert our learning management system so that it really does become a place where we convene. Because maybe that's it, maybe it's this piece of thinking about, rather than sorting and selecting and keeping people out in the transfer of knowledge, it is, as David has described it, this idea of constructing knowledge. So making our LMS do that job of truly sort of throwing that wall open and saying, in this space, we will convene everyone who has insight into this particular topic.
Yeah, thank you. So we have some questions, and we want to open the floor for other questions as well.
So no one upvoted here, so just going down, the first question here is, how would confidentiality issues be addressed regarding the student profile ID? I know that was probably addressed to you, but again, I think if anybody wants to answer, I'll run around with the microphone if anybody wants to engage. I know we only have a few minutes, but hopefully we can steal maybe 5 more.
I think that there's an interesting question around confidentiality that goes hand in hand with privacy, right? And as our notions of privacy are evolving, or sometimes devolving, I think that's a real question, right? Who owns the data? Who has to disclose the data, and to whom? And I think that's something that we are starting to really force a conversation on across all of our platforms. And as that continues to evolve, I would hope that that would inform something like this.
Anybody have anything to add? I also want to give a chance for people to have verbal questions. What pieces of ed tech are you most excited to implement into our courses in the near term, 6 to 12 months? I'll jump on that one. We're working on some medical terminology and anatomy, physiology courses that we're trying to figure out how we can use gamification, which I mentioned a little bit, to think about how we can engage our learners. And the other is potentially we're looking at 3D modeling in the anatomy and cross sections so that students could see an augmented reality, an organ, and dissect that organ in 3D space. and how we can get that technology into their hands. And I would say that 6 months might be a little fast, but 12 is maybe realistic for that on a small scale in certain courses. I don't know if anybody else has anything for that. And from China, David, in your example from China of the AI teacher that outperformed the real teacher, how was success achieved, defined, or measured? It was was Chris that asked that, or Tara? It was a math test, so there are correct and incorrect answers, and they were all multiple choice and fill in the blank test items. So the students took 3 months and were taught only by an artificial intelligence tutor or only by a high-ranking Chinese tutor, and then they took a test before and after. And the last one we have here is how may the increasing importance of big data to higher ed policy affect education of skills that may be difficult to quantify? Is there a danger of the big picture focusing more on the so-called hard skills at the expense of the so-called soft skills?
And I've got a quick answer to that, and then I want to turn it over. I think that the most important thing that we can do is to bring together hard skills and soft skills. I think that the separating the two risks treating them as though they are separate things that don't happen together. So, okay, great. You can do a statistical analysis. Can you communicate that clearly to other people? That's a soft skill married to a hard skill. Most of what we do as professionals and as specialists bring together hard skill expertise with soft skill knowledge and sophistication. And I think that's something that we're starting to realize, and we're building into our courses and our way of understanding education. It's not entirely there yet, though. We still have a lot of gap in understanding.
And I think, too, that there's this notion of soft skills, and I think we sort of allow people outside of the university to decide what that soft skill is. I think there are sort of next generation soft skills about how people behave in online environments and how people interface and develop relationships in online spaces that nobody's even touching. And in some ways, we could position ourselves to offer how to coach people in those spaces. There are generations of, when I think about my sons who are teenagers who have whole dialogues online about things that they're doing in some cases starting with a video game, but that sprawl out into all these other places, and this is completely unmediated. And as a parent, I always wonder, how is this going? Because we think we know it's this thorny, awful, horrible place. I'm not so sure. I think that they start to develop their own norms, but those are the same kinds of things that are happening in our discussion boards and as we grow these spaces. We need to figure out how we develop those soft skills too.
Tara? Yell and we'll repeat. Or David will run.
I wanted to go back to the big data question, and one of my initial reactions is one of a little bit of worry or concern about the legitimacy of the assessments that would generate the data, because I think in such a competitive and increasingly competitive world, it's going to become really important to have accredited and legitimate assessments so that the data is meaningful.
Absolutely. I think that's something that we continue to struggle with, and it gets to the question of access, it gets to the question of quality, it gets to the question of sort of control. It's, in sort of gross terms, it's also, do we actually accept that a bachelor's degree from any institution is the same as that from any other? We don't, right? For different reasons. And some of those are, history and class and all of that. But some of them, we know certain schools are really good for certain things. And others may not have that deep expertise.
I would say the tag end of your question, Tara, about the David's example from China, there's some really interesting research about how the Pearson's My Math Lab package was used by itself, just here, go do this on the computer, versus having it mediated by an instructor, and the results were the most successful. The students were most successful in remediating their missing math skills in the setting where they had both the targeted My Math Lab work and the skilled instructor working with them. So I think there's research out there to sort of counter that, like, oh, they'll do better with the computer, or that there's, especially where you've got these very finite, granular skills that someone's trying to remediate, that you need that guide to help really make it stick. So I think there's a lot to learn from how to really use this to its best effect.
And to teach the soft skills and whether an AI teacher could accomplish that.
So one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting was a comment that was made about protecting intellectual property. I think, Erin, that was a comment that you had made vis-a-vis the providing access as a way to protect intellectual property. With the opening of, or the creation of all of the new platforms that allow us to Google just about anything, and you've got a ache somewhere, so you Google that, and you get a physician who's world-renowned in that particular ache. Certainly, I think that the notion of who owns what is a real central part of the educational premise. And as I think in the new world, if you would, it is going to be quite different. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
I mean, I think that it is part and parcel with the changing landscape of higher education, right? Where we're even down to the level of the importance of citation that we spend so much time sort of drilling our students on, is this notion that giving credit for the work that belongs to the individual who did the work. But we also know that whole reputations have been built upon the association of one thought leader with a particular university. So what does it look like when you sort of strip that away and say that that's no longer gate kept? You don't have to pay a price, whatever the price is, whatever the ticket of admission is, to have access to that. Does that still have value? Is that still what people make their careers upon? I think it really challenges the notion of the academy in general. And we see we're doing our first run of using open educational resources instead of textbooks right now. And even though this is just this very small, dipping our toe into that area, I'm very aware of what that means in terms of I have students not buying a textbook, because this is curated material that is there for them to use. I think that it's going to call into question how we have monetized research and how we have managed that, and I don't know that any of us really know how this is going to go.
Well, and I guess what I would say is that maybe this will offer us the opportunity to get back to teaching.
I almost said that, and I thought, that's too Pollyanna. Leave it to Martha. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if that's what happened, if that pushed us to that?
I'd just add on to that I think there's a real parallel to remix culture, right? So right now, anything in the universe that you can experience, you can steal, and you can remix it, and you can put it back out there on different platforms. And the question is, what value does the original piece have as a generator of new ideas? What value do you bring then in remixing it? Are you simply doing yet another remix of Britney Spears' Toxic? Or are you really giving us something new and creative? And I think that changes our perception of quality, especially in terms of educational materials. Because if you're a student in a particular course, you're getting that course material and you're getting that instructor's presence and their contribution. If you can see all the other versions of that course at other schools, you have suddenly a different way of understanding what it is you're getting that's unique and what it is you're valuing. And I think that should be terrifying to anyone who's ever been in a classroom, and yet really also kind of exciting. So this is these are those weird knife edges that we're on.
So one of the things, though, I think that what we're in the business of is helping people learn. So I guess what I'm suggesting is what we need to do is shift away from us and shift to them. And that's the reason why I find the constraints of intellectual property to be in some senses a anchor that is weighing down education. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much. You've been a fantastic audience.
The marathon has ended.
David's going to exit stage center. All right, guys. So that wraps up the second annual Online Learning Symposium here. I just want to say a few words to close. We've all learned a lot, I think, in these last 2 days. I think having this opportunity to get together as colleagues with our greater UNE community, it just never ceases to amaze me the level of not only brilliance, but passion that permeates literally every level of this college, every level of this university, every department. It's pretty amazing. I hope you guys have all taken away as much from this session as I have. In terms of where we go from here, I think, this is a great, successful second annual event, and we are very much looking forward to next November, hopefully expanding this symposium and bringing in more colleagues from a broader community, whether that's locally, regionally. We intend to continue to build this event and bring more folks in and just kind of broaden and grow our internal community here. So I very much look forward to that. Please keep an eye out for our planning committee to be soliciting probably a number of things, including contacts that we may be able to reach out to help us tap into and expand our network for this event. And we will begin planning solicitation for proposals for next year, likely much earlier, so that we can have a even broader set of skills represented. So again, thank you so much to everybody that presented. Everyone that stepped up to this podium was fantastic. I can't say that enough. And additionally, everyone that was in the audience and engaged and asked tough questions, you were fantastic as well. I think all of you, you made this event really special. So thank you, and we'll see you next November.